What's up everybody, Gen X Dividend Investor here. In this interesting video, I share the 7 milestones that dividend investors can go through during their investing lives. So please show your support by hitting that thumbs up button, subscribing if you haven't yet, and clicking that bell notification. Okay, so the impetus of me doing this video is that I'm often asked what milestones I've had throughout my dividend investing life. Like a common milestone for most investors is when their portfolio is finally worth 6 figures. But for dividend investors, I'd say the first milestone is actually when they first learn about dividend investing. Thus, milestone 1 is one of the most important ones, and can literally be a life-changing moment in not only your life, but in the lives of your future descendants, as learning about dividends might be the catalyst that changes the financial futures for yourself and your lineage. Of course, there's a difference between understanding the basics about dividends versus truly researching them and understanding about their snowball potential through multi-decade dividend-centric investing. And there are lots of ways to learn about dividends beyond just watching videos like mine. Like maybe you ask ChatGPT about passive income, and you see that it mentions that you can invest in stocks that pay regular dividends, and that companies distribute a portion of their profits to shareholders as dividends, providing a steady stream of income. Whatever it is, hopefully something triggers that light bulb moment of understanding to go on in your mind, and that's when I'd say you achieve milestone 1 in your dividend investing path. Learning is often the first step in improving the potential for your financial future, and hopefully you take the second step. And that brings us to milestone 2, which is another incredibly important milestone, because that's when you get your first dividend, which also means you actually started investing. Now, the reality is that most people in the world don't know about dividends, and most people don't actually invest in the stock market at all. Some people are surprised when they get their first dividend payout, perhaps getting clued into them after seeing one on a brokerage statement, and so a question I have is, do you count them as a dividend investor? I mean, does the act of getting a dividend make you a dividend investor? I think probably not, at least not until you decide internally that you are one and you head in that direction, but leave me a comment telling me what you think. Anyways, Motley published an article based on a Gallup survey of the percentage of American adults that own stocks. They found that around 50% to 60% of American adults had some money invested in the stock market in recent years, and this includes if it's held by a spouse in a shared account. But they said that only about 15% of American adults own stocks that they purchased themselves, such as through a brokerage account. So if you've directly bought stocks, then you're in the minority of people out there, which is probably good for you but unfortunate for them. Digging into the Gallup survey, we find that the more money you make, the higher the likelihood there is that you'd own stock. So like more than 84% of Americans with an annual household income of $100K or more own stock, versus only 24% if they earned less than $30K a year. And if you were employed, you were more likely to hold stock, and if you were married, you were more likely to own stock, probably due to the shared assets aspect. Now, if you look at stock ownership around the world, then you'd find that a much smaller percentage of adults in most other countries tend to own stocks, probably because most countries aren't as prosperous as the US is. Like, if we look at the 10 countries around the world with the highest median income, we see that the US is 5th out of 195 countries out there. Median means half the people make more and half make less. Note, these amounts are in international dollars, which is a theoretical dollar often used in country-to-country comparisons. Now, when we look at the 10 lowest country median incomes, you'll hopefully understand why it's a privilege to even get the opportunity to own stocks, because most of the world doesn't, whether we're talking Africa or China or wherever. Like, this data corroborates that 55% of adults in the US have investments in the stock market. Then it drops to 33% in the UK, then down to 13% in China, and only 3% in India. So bringing all that back to milestone 2, a big moment in a dividend investor's life is when you get your first dividend, which puts you in the far minority of people in the world. So congratulations if you've experienced the wonder of being an owner of a company and getting a share of the profits in the form of a dividend. It's truly one of the best and purest forms of passive income that I've ever come across. Okay, now let's move on to milestone 3 in a dividend investor's life, and I identified 3 criteria, any one of which you'd need to achieve to hit the milestone. Number 1 is if your dividend portfolio value is greater than or equal to 5 times your annual expenses, then you'd qualify for milestone 3. So like if you're single and renting a crappy apartment, maybe your annual expenses are $15K a year, so you'd need a dividend portfolio worth at least $75,000 to be at milestone 3. Or if you were the head of a family of 6 people, and your annual expenses were $75K a year, then you'd need a dividend portfolio of at least $375,000 to achieve milestone 3. And that's actually a lot of money to have invested in the market, which is why few people actually get there. Like Vanguard released a report about retirement account balances by age, and 65-plus-year-olds had the highest average amount at $280,000, though the median portfolio amount at that age range was far lower at $87K. So that's another way of saying that you gotta be doing way better than average if you want to make Milestone 3. That being said, I'm very confident that if you're watching this video, then you'll do better than average, because spending your time learning about investing already puts you ahead of most people, and then executing on your investing strategies over the coming decades should allow you to eventually end up way above these average and median amounts. And for reference, the average household expense in the US is $5,500 a month, or about $67K a year, and I'll elaborate more about expenses in a moment. Okay, and then the number 2 criteria to achieve Milestone 3 is if your annual dividend income is greater than or equal to 25% of your annual expenses. So again, using that single person that is maybe renting who has $15K a year in expenses, they would need to be making $3,750 a year in dividends to be at Milestone 3. Or that family of 6 would need to be making 25% of their $75K annual expenses, i.e. $18,750 a year in dividend income. Or if we were talking about the average household in the US that has $67,000 a year in expenses, then they would need to be making $16,750 a year in dividends to achieve Milestone 3. And I count all dividend income whether it's in a taxable or a retirement account, as it depends on a bunch of factors which account type is best for you. The final criteria I identified for someone to be at Milestone 3 was if they're using dividends to pay some of their bills, regardless of what their portfolio value was or what their annual dividend income is. Because actually using dividends to pay bills shows me that you're serious enough and understand things enough to be progressing along the dividend path, and thus merit being at Milestone 3. Now, household expenses obviously vary by a lot of factors, including how much money your household pulls in, if you rent or own, how many people are in your family, where you live in the world, if you are frugal or a spender, etc. Also, we know that inflation has been high lately, so I'm sure averages are moving up. Please leave me a comment telling me what you estimate that your average annual expenses are. I read that about a third of households rent in the US, and that renters often pay 2/3 of what owners pay for shelter. Transportation is the next biggest expense category, and it's around $9,500 a year. The third largest expense category is food at $7,700 a year. Then you can see other categories such as insurance, healthcare, entertainment, etc. Bottom line, as long as you hit any of those criteria I mentioned, then you're Milestone 3 in my book. And now, before I jump into Milestone 4, which is when dividend stock investing is your primary investing focus and or asset class you own, and there are 2 criteria I identified, either of which qualifies you. Number 1 is if your portfolio value is greater than or equal to 10 times your annual expenses. Or number 2 is if your dividend income is greater than or equal to 50% of your annual expenses. So in the average US household expense scenario of $67,000 a year, then that household would need a dividend portfolio worth $670,000 to achieve Milestone 4, or they would need to be making $33,500 a year in dividend income. Or the $15K expenses a year person would need a portfolio of $150,000 to hit Milestone 4, or would need dividend income of $7,500 a year. At Milestone 4, you are really progressing nicely as a dividend investor. You probably have a great handle on dividend investing, and you're hopefully continually learning more and pushing hard to buy assets, ideally quality ones, with the goal of having dividend income to improve your financial footing. I keep pushing quality in my videos so that people don't take shortcuts in hopes of getting income faster. The more shortcuts you take, the more burned you tend to get, in my experience. Yes, sometimes things will work out if you cut corners, but usually anything good in life takes time, and while it's understandable to want to quickly progress, my advice is to buckle down and start laying those bricks. Avoid taking out loans to invest in stocks. Avoid penny stocks. Just keep investing, step by step, and you'll be winning, even if it feels slow. Milestone 4 is only achieved by a small subset of people around the world, so congratulations if you made it, and it's something you should feel proud of if you did it on your own. Next up is Milestone 5, achieved by an even smaller number of people. This is when you use dividends to pay the majority of your bills, so you may be able to scale back at work. And or this is when your portfolio value is greater than or equal to 15 times your annual expenses, and or your dividend income is greater than or equal to 75% of your annual expenses. So that average household with $67K of expenses a year would need to hit that huge goal of a 7-figure portfolio, as 15 times $67K is basically $1 million. Or that's when their dividend income would need to be over $50K a year. If we look at our low expense person who has $15K a year expenses, then that would mean they would hit Milestone 5 if they had a $225,000 dividend portfolio and or over $11,250 a year in dividend income. Now, I just read an article that's worth sharing about how Gen Z's economic outlook is bleak, and they feel like the cards are stacked against them. Almost a quarter of Gen Z respondents in a McKinsey study said they do not expect to retire. 55% of people aged 18 to 35 put retirement planning on hold during the pandemic. Now, I understand that each age group has their own unique set of challenges, and I can see people's growing anxieties over a variety of things. I guess with their higher levels of student debt, combined with inflation and etc., many of them just don't see a way to success. Plus, many Gen Zers are increasingly looking for ways to prioritize quality of life over financial achievement, seemingly at all costs. And while I agree that you don't want to put off everything for your future, it's equally a mistake to put nothing off for the future. In my experience, the people who put off investing in their retirement futures usually significantly regret it down the road. They get to a stage where they realize they should have been investing when they were younger, but unfortunately they didn't. Regardless of the age you're at, please consider living a bit more frugally and then drive any savings into quality assets, and look for ways to increase your income potential. If you do all that, then maybe you can achieve Milestone 6, which is when your dividend portfolio pays all your bills such that you no longer need to work and are financially free, and or when your portfolio value is greater than or equal to 20 times your annual expenses. And or if your dividend income is greater than or equal to 100% of your annual expenses. So for the average household with their $67K of expenses, that would mean a total portfolio value of $1.34 mil and or dividend income of at least $67,000 a year. Now that's obviously very hard to get to, but it's possible. And if we look at our single person who had low expenses, i.e. the $15K per year expense person, then they would need a portfolio of $300,000 or a dividend income of $15,000 a year to achieve Milestone 6. And that brings us to Milestone 7, and so for the few of you that live frugally and keep investing for multiple decades, and don't give up, even when markets crash really badly, well then you might just be able to get to Milestone 7. This is when your dividend portfolio pays all your bills multiple times over, and you no longer need to work and are financially able to splurge most of the time. Thus, this is when your dividend portfolio is greater than or equal to 40 times your annual expenses, and or you have cash flowing dividend income greater than or equal to 200% of your annual expenses. So this is when you're living a life of abundance. The average household would need a portfolio of about $2.7 million and or dividend income greater than or equal to $134,000 a year. Or if you're that single frugal person living on $15K expenses a year, then for them to hit Milestone 7 they'd need a $600,000 portfolio and or would need to be cash flowing $30,000 a year in dividend income. Now, a key thing to remember is that these aren't general financial milestones, which would normally include things like ensuring that you had an emergency fund, had paid off your high-interest bad debt, and stuff like that. So these are just milestones that made sense to me, but others can make sense too. Like I had a milestone to have a $100,000 annual dividend income portfolio from conservative blue chip stocks, which I finally just achieved last week. The real takeaway should be to live in a financially prudent way, to start investing, not to stop. The sooner and the more you invest, the faster you'll be able to retire, and the faster you can move up those dividend investor milestones. Now please do me a favor and leave me a comment telling me what dividend milestone you're at, as I always appreciate hearing from you guys. And with that, I'd normally close things out with a shout out, but I'm sold out of all my Patreon Aristocrat seats as well as my King seats, so instead I'll ask you to consider using my Seeking Alpha affiliate link, which usually gives you some extra perks when you use it and you sign up for their service. I personally paid for Seeking Alpha Premium for multiple years because they're the best stock website on the internet, and now I'm grateful that they've agreed to sponsor me when I talk about them. In fact, I was just looking up some articles on Seeking Alpha moments ago, and got this breaking news alert that all 23 big banks passed their Federal Reserve stress tests. That's great to see, especially in this economic climate, and I bet big banks might see some love tomorrow in the market on the 29th, and on Friday we should hopefully get some announcements of dividend increases and buybacks. And if you appreciate when I do free dividend investing videos like this, then please hit that thumbs up button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and click that bell notification. Finally, I highly recommend that you join my free Dividend Discord chat server, which has over 10,000 dividend investors on it from 72 countries around the world. Thanks for watching, stay positive, and I'll talk to you again real soon. I am not a financial advisor, and these videos are for entertainment, inspiration, and educational purposes only. Investing of any kind involves risk. I am only sharing my opinion with no guarantee of gains or losses on investments.